Greetings everybody, Chris Cherubini here to give you a quick introduction to version 1 of LightShape, the enhanced QMap generator for artists and designers. Made for Unity, LightShape will work with both the free and pro versions, and I also wanted to make sure it was as easy to understand and use as possible. LightShape has features that I know I've needed in a QMap generator before. Features like control over the brightness, contrast, color tint, and background color of the cameras that are used to generate the QMaps. And I also added the ability to render images that I call light shapes into the QMap based off of the light's position and the color, which is also overwritable in the inspector. Auto handling of scene objects is in there as well, objects that have reflective materials, and a couple other cool things too. Anyway, I hope you enjoy using LightShape, and I do look forward to seeing all the cool work you guys come up with it. So with that said, let's get the getting started. Okay, so quickly I just want to show you how to get this thing rolling. Under Window, there's this entry here called LightShape. Just click on that, and this nifty window pops up. It gives you a couple of buttons. The first one is where you create the actual LightShape manager and a default probe as its child underneath it. When you press it, boom, there you go. You can close the window if you want, or you can remove it if you want. This does not remove anything out of the project window or the project directories at all. It only removes the LightShape probes and the manager from the scene. That button is really useful because the probes don't actually have to be parented to the manager. They can be parented to any object that you want. And maybe you want to just get rid of them all and they're hard to track down or whatever. That button will just delete them all in one swoop. Okay, so to get started, what I'm going to do is open up this example compare scene that came with the LightShape package. And what we have here is a scene, very simple, with a LightShape manager and two probes that happen to be in the same position. The reason they're like that is because for a different purpose, I wanted to compare the different settings in exactly the same spot. But for getting started, I'm just going to go ahead and delete one of the probes, and I'm going to now gather all probes because I deleted one. If I do any sort of other operations while there's a missing reference in there, we'll get some error messages. The first thing here is unfreeze and gather all my connections. You can do that on the manager too, gather all object connections, all probes. And you'll see that in the probe itself, there are no objects in there. And that is because the radius is too small to auto gather. So what I'm going to want to do is, I could do this two ways. The first way, nice airplane. The first way is to expand the radius, and then you can gather your connections that way. And you can see the lines are drawn to the objects. The other thing you can do is, since there's only one probe in here, is you can do gather all objects, and it will gather all objects that have a QMap material or reflective material on it. So that's pretty cool. Since we only have one, that works for me right now. And then what I'm going to do is freeze the connections so that I don't accidentally unconnect them. And then that's that. So now that we have this set up, I can hit the render button and it will render a QMap. Right now, this is going right to the compare directory that came with the project. So what I'm going to want to do is unlock it, create test, delete this, keep the slash at the end, and I'm going to create a new folder. going to lock it again automatically, and then now you'll see a new directory here. And then I'll render my QMap out again, and my new one goes there. So that's pretty nifty. A couple options on the manager if you want to play around is the QMap size. You can go up or down in resolution. And the default is 128. You can also add a global tint that will add to each individual LightShape probes settings too. So if I want to add like a slight reddish color here, it'll add a slight reddish color to everything. For now, I'm going to keep that at black. Re-render again. I can also toggle if probes are shown when the object is not selected, which is, handy for clutter reasons. I can also change the color of the gizmo if I want, change the gizmo size, and so on. Now, the next section here is it basically toggles interactivity on these couple buttons so that you don't accidentally push stuff. The other thing here is gather all probes and remove all probes. You can remove all probes from your list, or you can gather all probes that are in the scene, and it'll automatically put them in the list and give them an index number. You can see if I duplicate this guy and gather all probes, I now have index 1, 2 that matches here. But I am going to remove number 2, and we're all good here. So there you have it for the manager. Oh yeah, one more thing. This read pixels method. If you're using Unity free, you have to have that checked on. If you're using Pro, you can use either one, but I suggest not using read pixels if you have the Pro version anyhow, because it's just so much faster to use the render texture method. The read pixels for the free guys, you have to click that on, and also make sure that you are in standalone in your game resolution. And so what you're going to see then is if you don't have the game window focused, it'll focus it to the game window, set the size, take the screenshot, and then you have your new QMap. But if you're using Pro, don't use that. I mean, unless you want to. So now for the probe, the object that does all the heavy lifting and makes all the images and sets all the settings and all that stuff. We have at the top here a couple of presets that you can try out. Right now we're in the default mode. And just to go through a little bit to show you, brightness is what you'd expect. It's the brightness of the output overall. Contrast is, what you'd expect. There is also a little midpoint variable here you can choose. So if you want, for instance, if I'm at a contrast of 1.5 and I want to see less of the dark areas, I would turn this up, because what that does is it pushes pixels that are below this value darker and pixels that are above the value lighter when you're above 1 here. It does the opposite, when you go lower than 1. But when you start going lower than 1, you end up going to a gray. So if you have contrast set to 0, you can see what your actual midpoint is. So values above or below this will be affected, and that represents the midpoint. Saturation is what you'd expect, similar to Photoshop. Turns everything grayscale at 0, pumps up the saturation. The reason I added that actually was not just so you could have saturation control, which ended up being a plus, but generally when you turn up contrast in an image, the saturation starts to go up too. Like it's getting very yellow. So what you'd want to do is dial the saturation back a bit. And you'll have to end up, you know, tweaking your sky color a little bit too to compensate. We also have tint color, which is similar to the global tint color, except this one is per probe. So if I have like a blue, I can tint my cube map blue that is associated with this probe, but then I could overall globally go into the manager and like give it that red, and then you see it mixes with it. But like I said before, we'll keep this at black, and we'll keep this one at black as well. Now, the world brightness is this pass. Everything that you see here, it's similar to brightness, but brightness will affect everything in the LightShape section. The world brightness is only for this pass. So what you may want to do, I can hear the coyotes outside, crazy. What you would want to do is to see the balance effect is turn on light shapes. So you can see you have this guy here, and you might want that to have more of a contribution than the world does. So you can see the effect that way. Turn down the world even further, and then you can see what you start to get. You can turn on the backlight, and you can start to see what's going on there. But we are not getting into that quite yet. So we're going to go back to the default setting. Back to normal. And then I'm going to explain this override camera background color. What this is doing is overriding your whatever you have assigned in the manager as your main. If you have a camera in here, LightShape will just use that color. And as you can see, it's the default Unity background color. Now, if I override it, it's exactly what you would want. So I want a green sky just on this probe. So I get a green sky just on this probe, and then you can see your camera's still blue. You might want a green sky. Now also, if you put a sky in your render settings, it'll use a sky as well. It'll render that in. So that's kind of cool. And then if you click that, if you have a sky and you click this, it'll override your sky box as well. So we'll go back to the default there. Clicking that off actually brings it back to the camera color. So we're going to skip render light shape for now and go right to this other objects in reflection colored. So right now you can see in the cube map that you don't see any of these spheres in here. That's because I have them excluded. So I'm going to unexclude them. And you're going to see the other stuff show up again. Now I may not want it to look like that. I may want the reflections in there. So that's a kind of a neat option. But I am going to put the really shiny ones back into the exclusion. What this does when you see the reflections in there, what it's actually doing is a second pass after it's done the first pass, and then applying the cube maps to the objects and then rendering everything again. But I've given the option also of not doing a second pass, and you can just choose a color. You can save a little time, I suppose, and give you a little bit more control. Put that back. Okay. So that's a pretty cool feature. The next section would be the probe object itself. Now, I'm going to dial back in this radius a little bit so you can see. It may be that you don't really want the image captured from the center of this volume. It may be that you want this probe volume right in the middle, so that, you know, anybody who enters this room is going to get the cube map. But it may also be that, you know what, I don't really like the way it looks from directly in the center because it looks kind of weird or whatever, right? So you can reposition just the center object. Maybe, for example, you have a doorway here and you really like the way it looks from that exact position. So now you update your cube map and now it's from that position. So that's kind of cool. Also, for pro users, you get a little preview that works with repositioning as well as click key there, as well as just moving the object around, moving the volume and everything together. Then get rid of that. Everything goes back. Update your cube to get the new stuff, and you're good. That's the basics of the image control and the transform stuff, moving it around and controlling it. You can update just your cube map, or you can update all cube maps that are in the manager list. So there you have it, the basics of the LightShape probe itself. And in another video, I'm going to go into the actual light shapes. But for now, on the website, there's a brief explanation of the different kind of stuff you can do with that. I'm going to go ahead and turn on bitmaps again, so I get my nice blurry reflection in my shader. And there you have it. Feel free to email me if you have any questions at cscherubini@gmail.com.